damn it. I was hoping to actually be prepared. All right, so on with the awkwardness. Thank you all for coming. Hello in Sydney. What we're doing today is a simple brown bag, but I'm going to do a dual purpose type thing and try and, at the beginning, present the idea of doing these tech radars so that CMD can try and build a capability around it, similar to the other three brands. So before we get into it, let's just have a quick look at that, and then we'll go into the actual brown bag on security tech that, we'll get to that. So essentially, this is the framework around what a tech radar is. Did you have a name for the whole strategy? And this is one part of it. It's called the vitality strategy, tech vitality strategy. Brett Henderson has put together a huge big plan, and we'll have a quick look at that before we progress. But essentially, the strategy includes the identification of like interesting tech and a process around adopting it at the end game. And perhaps in that, there's some other considerations like sunsetting the technology you're currently using, and trying to keep to the current technology, but not so far ahead of the game that we're going to be cutting ourselves from the bleeding edge, to use buzzwords. Some of the key areas that Digio are covering at the moment is the data engineering, so something that CMD is quite familiar with as well. There's a little bit of crossover there, and we can probably leverage a lot of the pre-existing tech strategy that, the vitality strategy that Digio have built up around that. But they've also got some digital specific stuff like mobile, test automation, platforming, and what were the others? Web and API. So some of those areas we're also familiar with in CMD, and we can obviously uplift our ability in this capability, leveraging those, but definitely with the data engineering part, I was really interested in getting involved in that. So what that looks like in practice, we will get into with an example, but before we get there, we have the idea of basically where technology is at on this kind of scale, and it correlates very similar to this slide here, where we have the horizontal axis, which represents where the technology and the industry is at this point, whereas the vertical is like business impact. So coming back to this correlates to the horizontal axis, where the industry's at. And where we want to be is that chasm. This allows us to identify some really interesting tech before some of the other competitors in our area probably will adopt it, or even perhaps they've even built up those partnerships with those vendors. So we can try and get in early and be a value add in the industry for whatever we identify is probably going to trend. And the process around that is going to the conferences and identifying all of the new things you've never heard of. I'm going to show you some interesting names that some of us have probably never seen before, but also going to like startup pitches in your particular area of interest, and hearing the pitches of these new companies that are trying to build a capability in certain key areas, because they're the ones that are going to be disrupting the most. But also every day people can go to these different community forums and meetups and try and get an idea through the networking, some other things that are coming up as well. So there's lots of techniques to try and find things that are in that chasm, and the best point for us as a business, as like Digio, CMD, and the rest of the brands, is actually moving out of that chasm. So while we can assess them while we're in that chasm, while the brand, is assessing the vendor, while the vendor's in the chasm, we can make those partnerships with the businesses as they come out of it and have a bit of a lower risk to become a partner with that brand. So this is something I prepared earlier. This is the result of the brown bag I'm going to present, and I'll come back and refer to this at the end. But at the end of a tech radar, this is the output. Everyone contributes who attends the tech radar to place these vendors and tech companies and products based on the business value and the industry impact. You guys may be familiar with the different quadrants. This correlates to that a little bit as well, but I might get into that. It's more about the practice. So this is the Brett Henderson's approach, the Digio approach. It seems to be adopted also by the other brands, but I haven't dug into it too much. I'd like to have CMD get to this level of capability as well. So I'm going to participate as much as I can with the tech strategy that Digio is doing when I have the time and bandwidth. But yeah, this is a fantastic effort, and if you go to Digio website, there's a couple of posts that they've posted on Medium. There's actually a section on the homepage that talks to this whole strategy. So it's a great capability, and I really hope that CMD can adopt it soon. So there's 4 different categories. This is moving to the brown bag. Sorry for the transition. There's 4 categories of vendors that I identified when I was at the AISA conference. So Cybercon was huge, and it was 2 days. One of the Digio people, Sonal, she was there with me. We broke up the effort for some of the talks, and I had some free time to walk the trade floor on one of the days. But the other day, I also went to some of the startup pitches. And out of the 4 categories, threat intel was probably the most interesting. There was some old vendors and some new vendors in this area. So I thought this would be the first one that would be of interest. So Recorded Future, not yet a household name, but a lot of you may have seen it. The reason why I brought this one up first is because they are a true threat intelligence company. That is pretty much the only thing that they do. And some of the really interesting pieces of information you can get out of them that no one else really has is impacted industries, as in if you're in telecommunications or if you're in the medical industry or something like that, they can give you like industry-specific threat intel so that perhaps you're not being affected by any impacts right now, or you're not being targeted, but someone else, like your competitor or someone in a different country in the same industry is. The internet, being global, it could easily impact you if you're running similar technology, similar vendors, similar supply chain. You could easily be targeted or impacted by these threats as well. So I find their product to be uniquely placed to deal with industry-specific stuff, but they also have all of the usual threat indicators like IPs that you can put into blacklist that are known command and control servers, and trends on different malware that's actually out there at the moment impacting people. So they're the stock standard threat intel things, but yeah, the industry stuff is really interesting. The next one is Intel 471. This is something I'd never seen before walking the trade floor. Their capability is in 2 separate key areas, and they have 2 separate products. The first one is malware, which is very similar to Recorded Future, and it's a pretty stock standard thing. The way they do it a little bit differently is that they actually go out into the dark web, deep web. I hate those terms. But they actually spend time, I guess, interacting with the developers of the software, which leads us to the second capability that they have. So not only are they understanding where malware is being developed, perhaps hasn't been seen, hasn't been sent to like VirusTotal, for instance, so there's no fingerprinting yet on the malware. They've got an idea of that malware really, really early, which is really, I guess, a differentiating factor for them. Some other companies may say that they're doing the same thing, but these guys tend to be quite surprising in their conversations the way they talk about it, which leads into the second capability, that they actually do spend time with these personas in the deep web, pretending to be bad guys to the point where one of their personas in the recent media has actually been portrayed as a bad actor and being a person, and this is a persona that these guys actually built up, right? Actually being the bad guy that's doing the attacks. That's how much reputation they've built up around these personas. They didn't actually carry out any attacks, contrary to the media. God bless them. But yeah, they're actually doing a really, really good job building up these personas of these fake bad actors so they can get really good intel. The next one, so Cinch. This is a New York-based company. The reason why I point that out is because they don't actually operate in Australia. I attended their startup pitch. I think they're looking for investment to pivot and move their capability into the Australian region. They are a service that runs globally. You can use it today, you can sign up, and they'll still operate with you as a customer, but they won't be able to support you as a business in Australia at this point. They're looking for investment and to move here. But what they're doing differently, and we'll go back to Tech Radar and we'll see where they're placed, it'll make more sense. They're making risk, everyone loves risk, I love risk, such a dense topic. They make it really digestible for the layman. They take away all of the governance kind of stuff, the compliance stuff. They get rid of all the jargon and they just present really easy to read, really digestible content that supports the idea of risk. So for instance, if you sign up with your email today and your email is at, say, langton.cloud, which is mine, they'll go and immediately scan langton.cloud and give you a whole big risk profile by the time that you have confirmed your email from your registration and it's ready to just look at. I was really impressed by that. It's a really, really fast scanning service. Some of the findings are a little bit interesting, similar to what you'd see with like OWASP.10, that sort of stuff. So they've got a bit of interesting and a bit of boring as well. But the point is that they make it really digestible. I was really impressed by the sentences they use to describe the threats and vulnerabilities. You can give it to a CEO who's never done a day on the tools in his life or her life, and it would be useful to them, which is really cool. The second area is just basic technology. There's no real name to put these two vendors in. Essentially what we're talking about here is generic service providers that have a bit of a capability IP internally. Sidearm is one of those. They're traditionally a consulting service in some ways that they're very similar to us, but they also have built up an MDR, and this is a new term. An MDR is like a manage, detect and respond, kind of like your endpoint protection, but they do it as a service. Sidearm is focused more on the incident and forensic side of detect and respond. So what they're actually providing is not revolutionary, but it is a differentiating factor in the industry at the moment because no one's really focusing their business on only the detection and response as a service. They're kind of pioneers in that area, in my opinion, and it was really interesting to see a business built on just that one capability that we pretty much all do in our businesses, our brands, and competitors. Casada. So Casada, as you'll see on the tech radar when we get back to it, they're not very well placed or very favourable by me personally. And again, I did the tech radar alone. If we were to contribute, some people might have some nice things to say about Casada. But yeah, defending against bots is probably not something that's going to make everyone go, oh my God, that's amazing. Because we have things like reCAPTCHA and, well, it's basically a solved problem in my opinion. So while they are going to help businesses who have bot problems, if you're putting your content on the public internet and bots can reach it, you've got to make sure that what you put there in the first place isn't something you want to protect from bots. Yeah, it's an interesting value proposition that they have, but I think it's more 1990s interesting than it is today interesting. So, Mimecast. Mimecast, all right, so everyone knows Mimecast as an email gateway product. But what they've recently added, which I wasn't aware of until I went to the conference, is the ability to take all of the malware samples and files that have been transmitted around employees and between yourself and your customers and stuff, and actually detonate that malware in a sandbox to see what it does. This is not a new concept. There's a lot of products that do this, but they're doing it in a email way and not just general file sending, which is particularly interesting because being tolerant of a mail delivery delay is basically what you're going to get from other vendors at this point when they're talking about detonating malware. You're going to get a delay. These guys, I don't know how they've done it, but they've seemed to never be asked that question. Or let me rephrase that. They've never had that concern raised by their existing customers, as in there is no delay. Somehow they've managed to do it extremely fast. Have never used the product myself. I'd like to see it. I'm kind of skeptical. But every time that we're talking about detonating malware in a sandbox, we're usually talking 10 minutes minimum, maximum, probably about 3 hours. So yeah, like the VirusTotal example, you produce a report from the VirusTotal perspective based on detonating malware in a sandbox. VirusTotal takes you about 3 minutes minimum to go through all of the scanning that they do in the background to give you that report. For some reason, Mimecast, they're suggesting that they're faster. They're faster than the industry best at the moment. So I'd really like to see that. I'm quite skeptical. All right, so services, more our space. We have Hack Hunter. All right, so Hack Hunter. If anyone is in red teaming or going on site to do physical penetration testing, you pretty much know that your best way in is using these unprotected Bluetooth devices, kind of like your mice and your cameras and all these different things that everyone just throws around everywhere in their office space without thinking about protecting them. What these guys do is pretty extraordinary. They've got purpose-built devices for certain different Bluetooth light waves, infrared light waves, and different Wi-Fi spectrums, and even some of the new IoT types of communications, so the lower and higher bandwidth that is used outside of the Wi-Fi as well. And these devices are specifically designed to tap that traffic and try and identify when there is, using machine learning and AI, try and detect when something bad is potentially happening over the airwaves in your office. It's really, really cool. Again, being hands-on will be the deciding factor, but I don't know anyone else who's as comprehensive in this space as these guys, and it was really interesting to talk to them. Secure. So she's an amazing woman who runs this company. I forget her name. She did a demo, and that demo went over time by 15 minutes, and at that point, she was still typing while they're pulling her away. Really into penetration testing, and it's a Windows-specific penetration testing company, Windows networks and everything. So the reason why I added this wasn't because they're going to come to Australia and do a penetration test. I mean, they might, but they do have like an academy, like a training part of the business, where we can all, as individuals, probably go and learn. Maybe get Mantel Group to support us as well. Their material will be very, very in-depth, very, very deep diving into how things work. For instance, the demo that she showed us was getting plain text passwords out of Chrome. And as we all know, that used to be really easy traditionally. Today, it's kind of considered not possible. Well, they've demoed at a conference live how it actually is completely trivial. If you can get physical access to the computer and you can boot into recovery mode, you have access to basically everything, because at that recovery mode version of Windows, Windows 10 and all the different versions, they don't use the user-specific encryption keys to encrypt anything, and that's what Chrome uses. So that level of knowledge and being able to demonstrate that was just incredible to me. It was mind-blowing, and it just kind of showed me that all of our preconceived ideas of the way things work can be challenged, and this company seems to be doing a really good job in the Windows space. I'm a noob at Windows, so yeah, kind of blew my mind. You guys probably wouldn't be as impressed if you're a Windows person. But yeah, basically that's all of the brands that I put into the radar. And it resulted in this when Callum and I did the exercise. You may have noticed during me talking about each of these companies that we had the adopt, assess for most of them, and trial for a couple as well. This is an outcome of the tech radar. And I'd like to spend some more time with people doing a tech radar, mostly C&D people at this point. I want to build that capability up, so anyone who's interested, reach out to me. I'm trying to work together and probably even get involved in Digio's version of it. Any questions about any of the brands or tech radars in general?
Out of the brands that are the top right covers, which one is that? High business impact, high HP benefit?
Yeah, so Secure, we have Recorded Future and Hack Hunter. Which one of those are we asking about?
What kind of scenarios would you envision for trialing?
So Recorded Future, I put down, I think, as trial from memory. The reason why is they're a trusted brand, getting close to being a household brand name in threat intelligence. They're probably going to give you the most bang for your buck if you're in a niche industry. If you're not, then perhaps the business impact will be a lot lower. So that's probably why they're so high up there. But it is obviously industry specific, of course. Secure, again, if you're interested in doing penetration testing services in Windows, being quite across penetration testing as a general practice, I've kind of never had my mind blown quite as much as this presentation, and looking at the academy that they provide on their website, the depth of knowledge that that company has built up and they make freely available for everyone to read. The reason why they're so high on the business impact is because if you actually got them into your business, they would absolutely blow your mind as well. They're doing a little bit in terms of the industry. They're making us question some preconceived things, and that's pretty much how they focus a lot of their training material, questioning what you believe to be true. While they're not unique with that idea, the outcomes of them making certain questions answered has changed the way I think a little bit. So again, personally, it was just Callum and I. My opinion is that they're slightly above the industry standard at this point, but not quite so far as to say that they're being so unique that they should be praised for it so much. What was the other one? Hack Hunter. So yeah, that's based on their technology, as in the physical things that they place. It is proprietary. We can't go and replicate them and use them ourselves, you know, the hacker open source mindset. But we can get them in to do the same.
Is that, you know, software the hardware that they provide, so the outputs of that, does that go straight to their proprietary platform, or is that data available for third-party analysis?
Yeah, so for the stream, if I'm correct, Mikhail, the question was around whether using them and their hardware, proprietary as it is, would be as beneficial, and there's no alternatives out there?
Yeah, so essentially the hardware being proprietary is quite understandable. I was wondering the signal data that comes out of that, so the analysis.
The analysis.
Or could we analyze that ourselves, or do we have to go to a proprietary platform?
Yeah, so they provide you independent reports, like many of the penetration testing companies do. Because they're actually on site, you're pretty much giving them access to everything. So there is an arrangement you make with them, similar to getting approval to doing a non-physical penetration test. There will be an outcome at the end that's unique to you. I haven't actually seen the report that they provide, but based on the conversation, I can imagine that it's quite unique. You wouldn't be able to find a public example of it.
I was under the impression that this would install these essentially as a service. So that, let's say you have a facility.
It's not an ongoing engagement. No, it's a point in time. They would probably reuse the same pieces of hardware at different engagements and have maybe half a dozen available on hand and run half a dozen concurrent assessments. They'd have to take them with them. Some of the devices they had on the trade floor to show them off, and they are typical hacked together pieces of equipment, presented nicely in some nice casing, but they opened it up and one of them was an Arduino and there was another with a Raspberry Pi 2, and I saw some other like system on a chip type of board that I didn't recognise at all. Didn't have an opportunity to ask about that, but yeah, it was definitely not going to be left in your building after they leave. They definitely take that with them. So yeah, it's not going to be market ready to be sold like Hack5 type devices. You're not going to see these devices on the market anytime soon. I remember reading on their website something about patents. So even if you were to figure out how they work still on Borrow on whatever, you'd be in pretty big trouble if you replicated it based on the patent trolling problem at the moment. Maybe not, but you know, there's always that possibility.
Replicate it and don't tell anyone what you're doing.
Yeah, well, when you're on that far on the changing the industry, the way we're working, you get noticed. Yeah, it was a really interesting conference. If you guys are interested in security, it's not all about risk and compliance when you go to these conferences. It's becoming more technology-based and just for the tinkerers and makers as well. So yeah, go next year. It's pretty good. It wasn't just a boring conference.
So,
Arjun?
aside from the things you've discussed now about the sponsors, were there any talks at the conference that stood out to you?
Sorry, Arjun?
Were there any talks from the conference that stood out to you?
Any talks? That stood out. Yeah, so there was a Northern Territory, presentation of something that they achieved with VDI in hospitals and medical centres. I was actually talking to Callum about the VDI project that CMD are currently doing, and it's probably why it's so in front of mine right now. Basically, they built workspaces on AWS, and the doctors and nurses and other medical staff have RFID cards that are uniquely coded to them that they can walk up, to any terminal and resume a session using the resume session technology that's part of workspaces and see what they were seeing in their office. So, for instance, if they're working on a patient as a surgeon or whatever, and they had some material about the patient back in their office that they were reviewing before the surgery, if there is a terminal close by, they can just walk up to it, swipe within 3 seconds, have that patient file immediately available to them. Whereas in the past, they'd have like shared passwords up on the whiteboards and everyone would log in using the same password and have the same layout and have to go looking for things when they needed things. So there was a really interesting presentation on how Northern Territory, of all places, achieved that outcome and moved so far in advance for the rest of Australia. Basically, they've been so recognised for their efforts that it's actually going to roll out nationwide, and they're working with the relevant people who are responsible for our healthcare system to achieve that as well. So hopefully 2020 we hear about that in the news. But yeah, it's pretty fantastic. Like VDI and RFID, it's dead simple. We can all think about it in 10 seconds, but actually applying it, it was a great talk on how they achieved it. And it was all very political, of course, but yeah, it was still a great talk. So many great talks, actually. If Sonal, if you want to come up, you can talk about one of your favourites.
I can talk from here.
Yeah? All right. For the live stream, come on.
I think my favorites were two of his keynotes. There's Kevin Whitnick and Chris Langton, and both of them, the keynotes were, in fact, Bruce's keynote was so interesting. So probably many of you don't know, I'm doing some courses at uni as well. So some of the uni lecturers were there, and you might remember the bit he said about, how 5G. So he was talking about how 5G is in fact is not only for human beings and for us to connect to our phones and our laptop, but for devices to connect to devices. So he spoke about how in the future your car is going to authenticate with road signs and traffic lights and other cars, and that is what 5G is for. And that part of this keynote, I have heard it at least 3 times from 3 different lecturers at uni. It's probably the most impressive. And for me, it was eye-opening. Like, I never thought of IoT or connected devices in terms of cars authenticating with stop signs. Like, that was the last thing I would have thought of.
Yeah, it's quite profound.
Yeah. So, yeah, he actually said that in the future, everything's going to be a computing device. It'll also boost to other things. So your car's going to be a computing device that can also take you from one place to the other.
The way he explained it, that was quite profound, was less about it being a computing device and more about the perception of everything being a computing device wasn't even something you thought of. The fact that you would just go about your daily life and open your car door based on a chip that's somewhere in your subdermal or something like that, the fact that the human element, your brain patterns and your thought process in the future, you didn't even consider it being technology. It was just a part of your everyday life. The way he put it together was crazy. Yeah. More articulate than I could put it. But yeah, it was pretty profound. Yeah, his talks usually frustrate me though. Mitnick and his past. Anyway. All right, no other questions? Wrap it up. Come mingle. All right, cheers everyone from Sydney, wherever the camera is.
Yeah,
Okay.
I'm listening.